peace to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. We are pilgrims on a journey. We are travelers on the road. We are here to help each other walk the mile and bear the load. I will hold the Christ light for you in the night time of your fear. I will hold my hand out to you, speak the peace you long to hear. I will weep when you are weeping. When you laugh, I laugh with you. I will share your joy and trouble till we've seen this journey through. When we sing to God in heaven, we shall find such harmony. Born of all we've known together, of Christ's love and agony.
John chapter 19, verses 25 to 27. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Mary, who gave Jesus his humanity in obedience to God, stands in heartbreaking solidarity with her firstborn, his body racked and broken by the torture of the cross. There is a dignity about her presence, a strength in her silence. For this son, Mary experienced the strain of premarital disbelief, arduous travel in the name of political statistics, poverty and exile as the refugee of a violent, frightened dictator, the fear and confusion of a parent who misplaces a child or discovers within them wisdom beyond their years, the embarrassment of being shushed as their offspring finds their own place in the world, and now the terror of watching that child hijacked by the unwillingness of leaders to face the truth and change, the brutality of a regime that kills troublemakers. And yet, Mary still stands with honor, his agony her own, and receives a new child to care for, a new journey of parental anguish, the requirement to love someone who will stand in the place of Jesus. All who have loved and lost their own will be uncertain whether Jesus' parting gift was really the blessing popularly assigned to it. Whilst breathing the pain of loss of one on whom all hope is built, to be given the burden of another seems almost too much to bear. And yet, is that not what Christ asks of all of us? To stand unbowed at the foot of his cross and bear with him the weight of caring for all for whom he died. I've always wondered about the unspoken rules in families and among siblings when it comes to deciding the future of parents who may be getting on in years. I remember watching with great interest the conversations, said and unsaid, between my mother and her siblings as they decided what my grandmother would need to do in the case of my grandfather's death. And when that time came, it was clearly communicated to my mother, but not in words, that she, as the youngest daughter, would need to take care of my grandmother. My grandmother decided, however, that she was not going to leave her family home or her church community. And so it was up to my mother to leave her home and make a new home in the family home, which included caring for my grandmother. These words from Jesus to Mary and to John, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." Jesus, of all the times that he should be consumed with himself and his pain and his anguish, should be taking an opportunity to be reflecting on himself. But right now, Jesus is still thinking about his mother, not only his mother, but for those whom he cared. And so, as he reflects on what it means and what it will mean for his mother to have a life without him, he instructs Mary to take John as her son and to John to take Mary as his mother. He wants to make arrangements for his mother. He wants to ensure that she's taken care of financially and spiritually. And we are reminded by one of the 10 Commandments that this is an instruction from God to care and to honor your mother and father. And so Jesus wants to, in his last moments, ensure that Mary is taken care of. He is well aware of the dynamics and the context of first century Palestine. We can assume that Mary is now a widow because there is no mention of Joseph in the text that we've read. And so Mary finds herself almost without an identity once her son dies. Jesus knows this too, and so he wants to ensure that she is taken care of. Jesus refers to Mary as woman. For the first time, he does this at the wedding in Cana. Often people think that perhaps Jesus was being fickle or being disrespectful. But the first time that Jesus performs a miracle and the start of his public ministry, he refers to his mother as woman. And the last time that he refers to her as woman is just before he dies. Perhaps it is because Jesus cannot bring himself to call her mother or to call her mom, because this will be too painful for his mother to endure. Her son calling out to her for help, and there's nothing that she can do about it. If a new way of looking at John and at Mary is to be asked of us, we should perhaps consider, why is John being asked to care for Mary? We are told that Jesus does have other siblings. So why would it be necessary for someone else who is not blood related to care for Mary? Well, perhaps Jesus wanted to honor the one disciple who was brave enough to remain with him until the end, to be there at the foot of the cross. Jesus' other siblings perhaps didn't believe in him. In fact, we are told that they didn't follow Jesus as disciples. They merely followed him, probably because their mother followed him. Perhaps we are being shown and being told that families need not be related by blood only. John is given no instruction as to how he needs to care for Mary. He is only told, "This is your mother." And so, yes, the first thing that comes to mind is that he would need to care for her financially. But John would also need to care for Mary spiritually. There has to be a willingness to care for Mary, and there has to be a willingness to also care for us. This is what we understand in Luke's Gospel when we read Luke 8 verse 19. Jesus is told, while he is ministering to some people, that his mother and his brothers are waiting for him. And Jesus' response is, "Those who hear the word of God and act on it are my mother and my brothers." And so he isn't necessarily referring to his blood or to his actual siblings. Jesus is really beginning to teach us that we need to be looking at a new way of what family means, a new way of looking at the church and at looking at the family of God. Paul reminds us that Christ purchased the church of God with his own blood, and therefore the church is a family beyond a family, because the church is each and every one of us. So what do families look like? In our context, in South Africa, in 2020, the church looks very different from what it may have looked like 20 years ago. Families are choosing to adopt children. We have interracial families. We have families that are headed by children because of the pandemic of HIV and AIDS. We have parents who need to be both mother and father because of circumstance. We realize that it really does take a village to raise a child. We see how gender roles have been reversed, not only at home, but also in the workplace. And we see how elders are struggling to get along with millennials and to work with technology. And yet this is the church. Over the next few weeks, this very church is going to have to find new ways of dealing and being in God's presence and being available to people after COVID-19. What does Jesus require us to be? Who does Jesus require us to be? Right now, in isolation, and after isolation. The words that Jesus speaks to John and to Mary at the foot of the cross teaches us that true families are forged and held together at the cross. And so as we journey together on this Good Friday, we ask ourselves, what does Jesus require of us to be to each other?
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that He would give His only Son to make rich His treasure. How great the pain of searing love! The His wounds have paid my ransom.